My first experience that I now believe led to my feeling of imposter syndrome. I was coaching an academy group, and I played at the same level, if not a little bit better than they had. I'd gone through my certifications, and I had this incredible nervousness when taking the field about how they would react to me. And I wonder if any of you have sort of felt one step away of what happens if they find me out? And so I had this horrible feeling that that was going to happen. And over the years, I've realized that that was actually an indication, as I said, of imposter syndrome. So what I wanted to take you through actually was this mask that we sometimes wear to cover the imposter syndrome signs. And you'll see from what I take you through that it's far more prevalent than most people believe. So what I've titled the talk is "You Belong Here," because a lot of people don't think they do, because they have imposter syndrome. And so how do we beat it? How do we recognize it? What do we do about it? And so thanks, Linda, for inviting me in today. So looking forward to taking everybody through this. So let me start with some data. Now, in the green, that's about 30%, as you can see, it's people who get imposter syndrome. If you look at the 15 to 17% in orange, it's other people who get imposter syndrome. And then if you go to the 50%, it's literally everyone else gets imposter syndrome. It's a joke, Sarima. Don't take it too. So
I guess you were
everyone
able to
feels
see it
like an
in my
imposter.
face. It's like,
Yeah,
what is that supposed to mean?
I could tell.
Everybody?
I thought I needed to do a subline there. So everyone feels like an imposter sometimes, and that's okay. As this will unfold, I've got a little bit more data to show you in a second. But let's look at how it was discovered, so to speak. It's not that long ago. There were two ladies that you can see their pictures here that did some research back in 1978. They were psychologists and they were studying high achieving women. Now, not unrelated is the fact that about the same time, people were discovering something called the glass ceiling, which, of course, as now we all know very well, is women that couldn't break through because not because they weren't able to or had the ability, but because to a large extent they were prevented from doing so. And so this study that they took around high achieving women matched up very much with the glass ceiling. There were women in very strong positions, and in those days, not many who had self doubt, who were made to feel that they shouldn't be there. And so they dug more into that research, and we'll look at some of that later. So that was the first discovery of imposter syndrome. There's a prevalence of imposter syndrome amongst different groups. And you'll see the first group is the one that they were studying, which is women in professional fields. But it's also prevalent in students and high achievers, minority groups, entrepreneurs, and in fact, people in Asheville. Now, I made that up too.
You're back to that.
So what are the signs of imposter syndrome? Well, there's self-doubting ourselves. And this tends to be persistent, not just the occasional one which we all feel, but it's a persistent one. For example, a solopreneur lands a high-paying client, but they think it's happened by mistake. Attributing success to luck. So another example would be a business owner wins an award but believes it was just luck, not their hard work. Another one would be fear of being exposed, much as I was on the soccer field. A consultant may turn down a big project because they're worried that they actually might be found out. Overworking, big one of imposter syndrome. Because what happens is, and I'm guilty, is that you tend to over prepare for sessions and work extra free time to prove our value. Perfectionism, another one I'm guilty of, which is a fear of failure. So in fact, you go 150%, not even 100%. A few more, which you may or may not recognize: difficulty accepting praise, just gloss it off when in fact you really do deserve it. Always comparing yourself to others. One of the things that it probably comes from my sports background, but I'm incredibly competitive at pretty much everything, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But if you're incredibly competitive, you tend to always compare yourself to others. Avoiding challenges, just not taking it on just in case. And a couple more, feeling like we never know enough. So we'll look at that. There are five types of people that have been bracketed in imposter syndrome based on research, and we'll look at this particular type later. And then last but not least is procrastinating, putting things off just in case you can't deliver. Now, a lot of famous people have struggled with imposter syndrome, and when I first got interested in this subject and did some research on it, I was surprised to find these particular people who suffered from imposter syndrome. The first is she's best known for her memoir, I Know Why the Caged Birds Sing. And it was Maya Angelou. And she's written 11 books. But each time she thought, uh-oh, they're going to find me out now. And so I was surprised by that. The second one was, and it doesn't matter which side of the political divide, as I call it, you're on. Michelle Obama is an impressive lady and has achieved a lot of good things. And she often felt like she didn't belong. And she famously said, I still have a little imposter syndrome. I still feel like, am I good enough? The third one surprised me too. Even as the head of a multi-billion-dollar company, he said, people tend to look at someone who's achieved a lot and think they have it all figured out. I can assure you, we do not. So he overcame it, by the way, by seeking mentorship and advice from trusted peers. The last one was probably my biggest surprise, which was this famous actor, Tom Hanks. Despite decades of success, he said, no matter what we've done, there comes a point where you think, what are they going to, when are they going to discover that I am, in fact, a fraud? So, by the way he overcame imposter syndrome and he acknowledged the doubt as part of human experience, that we all feel it. And he learned to reframe it with thoughts as a motivator. So, what is it? So, I think we've kind of described it a little bit, but here's a statement that I think describes it pretty well. It's the secret feeling of being a fraud when you are not, and the fear that someone's going to find you out. And that was described pretty much in that way by Rose Clance and Susan Imes, the two people that did that research back in 1978. There was a lot, it spurred a lot more research in the 80s, and there's been a number of papers written which all came to this kind of conclusion. So what happens when we experience imposter syndrome? First of all, there's the thoughts that go in our head. So the self-doubt, the self-criticism, overthinking, the sort of things that I described just now, and then feeling we're not good enough. That sparks some reactions in our nervous system. And those are the old one that we experience a lot, which is the fight, flight, and freeze. Poor sleep, tension, obviously anxiety, and then there's that feeling of overwhelm. And in fact, I'll talk a little bit about burnout as we go through this presentation. And then the last piece is the behaviors. And here I've already described some of those. So now you see how it's linked. So it starts with the thoughts, the nervous system kicks in, and as a result, our behaviors are manifested in perfectionism, over-preparing, comparing ourselves with others, procrastination, hiding opinions in case we're exposed, and then avoiding roles just in case we get challenged. So it's all about self-doubt, but there's a difference between self-doubt and imposter syndrome. And as I alluded to earlier, imposter syndrome tends to be more persistent rather than the occasional self-doubt. So the difference really is self-doubt's a feeling of lack of confidence in a specific situation or decision. However, imposter syndrome is a persistent belief that you're not competent. And here's the kicker, despite evidence to the contrary. So success over a career. And again, I'll allude to that shortly in another experience I went through. Now, some people have come across the Dunning-Kruger effect, and I've been asked when I've done this talk before that what's the difference. So now I actually put it in the I put it in the talk so that if it gets ahead of being asked for it. But a lot of people have heard of Dunning-Kruger effect. If you haven't, I'll explain what it is. But it is pretty much the opposite in many ways of imposter syndrome. It's a cognitive bias in which particular domain overestimates their abilities, and it was discovered or put to the name Justin Kruger back in 1999. So 20 years really after the original research on imposter syndrome. And they're often described, as it says here, the opposite sides of the confidence spectrum. So here you see it on a graph. On the axis Y is perceived ability versus actual ability. And imposter syndrome you have got actual ability, but you perceive you don't. Whereas the Dunning-Kruger effect is the opposite. You've got a high perceived ability of your own resources, characteristics, behaviors, but your actual ability is fairly low. And that's fairly dangerous, by the way. We often see it in youth that come out of universities who have got no experience but believe that they can do anything because they've been trained and certified in it. See that in certified people too. Certification is the most recent way of proving to everybody that you know what you're talking about. I would suggest that that's not always the case. So there's people like this who believe that there's people with limited confidence who overestimate their abilities. And so just so you know, that's actually me produced by AI as James Bond. Clearly, limited confidence. So let's move on to just a little bit more on the comparison of who it affects. So imposter syndrome affects high achieving, competent individuals. And we'll come to, if you could think about this, and you probably already have, you're way ahead of me, but there's a lot of advantages to actually having imposter syndrome. What they think if they manifest imposter syndrome is, I'm not good enough. The reality is they're more skilled and capable than they believe. And lastly, the result is they undersell themselves, they overwork, as we described earlier, avoid risk or doubt success. So they never really match up to their full capabilities, or they're unlikely to. In the world I live in, I see this a lot with solopreneurs and small businesses, entrepreneurs.
No, you're wonderful.
Now, if you look at the Dunning-Kruger effect, as we talked about earlier, it's the opposite. Who it affects? It's inexperienced or low competence individuals. What they think, I got this, with absolutely no reason for why they should believe it. The reality is they're less skilled than they believe. And then the result is they overestimate their abilities, make poor decisions, and resist feedback. So that sort of person, if recognized, needs mentoring, particularly in large companies, where they can be nursed along and helped understand that they've still got a lot more to learn in terms of actual execution and experience rather than just the theory. So why does this all matter to you? I'll give you 3 reasons. First of all, don't play down your own expertise, because we all tend to do that. We think we're being modest, whereas in fact, we've gone too far. Don't ignore your blind spots, and I'll explain what the blind spots are in a second. And instead, balance confidence with curiosity. And I'm going to end this talk today in a kind of tip that will help you lead with curiosity. So here's the advantages of imposter syndrome. And as I said earlier, everybody forgets that, you're not just, it's not an affliction. It's actually an advantage. It drives continuous improvement. People who feel like imposters are rarely complacent. They're always up and at it and want to perform. It keeps you humble and grounded. A little imposter feeling helps avoid arrogance, which you see in the Dunning-Kruger effect, by the way. It promotes empathy and stronger relationships because you're more likely to support others who struggle too because you recognize how they feel too. Two other things. It signals high standards and ambition. As I said earlier, most people who suffer from imposter syndrome, and suffer is probably the wrong word, but show indications of, are high performers. And then it can be harnessed as fuel. It sharpens focus, encourages preparation, and it propels growth. So all that perfectionism, high achieving actually results in really good performance. I don't know whether you've heard of this guy, Seth Godin. I read his blogs. He's written 22 bestsellers around marketing. I think one of his first early books was called The Purple Cow. It revolutionized the way marketeers looked at things. And one of his famous quotes, relevant to what we're talking about here, is if you don't feel like an imposter, you're probably not stretching far enough. So many years ago, and actually not that many years ago, probably 4 or 5. When you get to my age, everything seems many years ago, but about 4 or 5 years ago, I was sitting at the back of a room about to do a keynote speech to actually it was a 3M group, a marketing group. I was invited in. So this is what I say, and I'm still wondering why I was invited in because there's those semblance of imposter syndrome, right? So I've been invited in to talk to them about the way that Coca-Cola went to market with one of their biggest customers, McDonald's. And I was extremely nervous, but it was not just the self-doubt. It was more about these guys are really on an A game, really know what they're talking about. And I'm wondering whether my talk is going to be relevant, whether it's going to succeed, or I'm going to leave with the tail between my legs, never to be seen again. And somebody tapped me on the shoulder, leaned over and said, I thought I was in the back row, but clearly I wasn't, and said, Peter, I've come to this, I've been led into to this talk because I really wanted to see it. You know, with your experience and background with Coca-Cola and working on, big deal business like Philip Morris and Intel and Wrigley, I think you'll have a lot to share with this group. I'm really looking forward to it. Now, I thanked him obviously, and that's all I needed to dissolve that self-doubt and start getting my head in the game about how I was going to present. And it went extremely well, but it was a great example and a reminder to me that sometimes you need to think about your own track record and why you're in that room. You're there because you deserve to be. It's not by accident. So there's 5 types of imposter syndrome, which I wanted to take you through based on the research, both back from 1978, but the refined research afterwards. And I'll take you through those pretty quickly. The first one is the perfectionist, as I alluded to earlier, believes everything must be flawless. And they struggle as a result in a leadership role with delegation because they're the only one that can do it. And we see this a lot with leaders in industry. They wear all the hats because they think they're the only one that can actually properly wear them. The second one is the superhuman. He pushes to work harder than everyone. And the unfortunate thing about the superhuman is they don't know when to stop. And so they risk a high level of burnout. The third one is the natural genius. And they feel that they should master everything effortlessly. So they tend to avoid challenges because it should come naturally. And so if it's a real challenge, then I need to put even more effort into it because it should have come. The fourth one is the soloist. And this is the one that says, no, I don't need help. They avoid asking for it. They prefer to work alone because only they can do it. And you find this a lot again in the world I live in with solopreneurs. I have a couple of solopreneur clients. The other 3 run small businesses, and this is something I find is common across all 5 clients, that they like to do everything on. We have discussions now around imposter syndrome. The fifth is the expert, and they feel they never know enough, and as a result, that leads to perfectionism, and they avoid taking action because they just I'll put launching that website off until I've got absolutely everything right, and I've studied everything, and I know how to drive SEO, and I know how to get my traffic up. So, having taken you through what it is and how it works in the brain and how it manifests itself, how can we help ourselves if we have it? Or indeed, how do we help other people who've got it? Because some of our friends you've probably seen that. I've got a number of friends who just brush off their success with, oh yeah, I just got lucky. Now, sometimes that's modesty, but if you dig a little bit, it's probably a really good sign of imposter syndrome. So the first suggestion I have is reframe the negative thoughts, which is pretty much what I did in the back of that room for that keynote speech, which is, I deserve to be here. I've worked hard. I've worked for some large companies. I know how this thing works. And I'm about to impart something that I think will help them. And we'll come more to the help and leading with curiosity that I referred to earlier very shortly. Track success. You don't have to, yes, write it down. Look at all the things I've done. One of the things that I do now, and I've tried and started, but I finally, I think, on a roll now, is I do a journal. And it's a very short journal, but it tracks what I learned today and what did I do really well. And of course, I use affirmations as well. But if you do that on a regular basis, it has helped me stop beating myself up. Talk about it. I am very fortunate to be in one particularly good peer group, which is called the Circle of Bewilderment for obvious reasons. And we meet on a ad hoc basis, probably 3 or 4 times a year. And it's helped me just be myself and find out that I'm not the only one with the views that I've got. So if you don't have a peer group, and as we get older, it becomes more important, to be honest, to stay relevant and to just have somebody to share some of the things you think about. Embrace learning and growth. It's something that people who know me well know. I got a remarkable, and if you've not heard of that, look it up. I got one of those before most people had even heard it was out. I started making notes on my iPad before most people had an Apple Pencil. It's just something that's part of me. So embrace learning and growth because it fashions curiosity. And then challenge perfectionism. I let things go now that I never used to before. It doesn't have to be 150% right. It doesn't even have to be 100% right. I have the confidence now to know that if I've got it 80% right, then I know enough because of what I've done in my life to be able to carry the next 10%, 20% on the fly. The last one is probably an interesting one that you didn't expect, which is learn about StoryBrand. I talked about curious earlier, and one of the things about imposter syndrome is reframing the fact that you worry about your own abilities with helping others with theirs. And so I'm going to this sounds like a different direction, but in fact you'll see how this works very quickly. So if you've not learnt about StoryBrand, I'm going to take you through it really briefly. It comes from a book by Donald Miller years ago, where he actually tracked how, and he's just written a new book called StoryBrand 2.0, where he tracked and talked about every major book and every movie from Hunger Games to Star Wars has a formula, which I will unveil to you. So it's a marketing framework that helps business clarify their message by using a storytelling structure where the customer is the hero and the brand is the guide. What's it got to do with imposter syndrome? All will be revealed. Imposter syndrome makes entrepreneurs feel like they're not enough to market themselves effectively. The story brand framework helps shift the focus, as I alluded to just a minute ago, from self-doubt to serving, either serving people you know or serving customers. And instead of worrying, therefore, about am I good enough, you ask, how can I solve my client's problem? And every person that you talk to is really concerned about solving a problem. Every purchase we make, if you think about it, is to solve a problem. We're looking for a solution to something. So how does it work? Well, here's the framework that Donald Miller put together. Every story or major film, and let's use Star Wars, starts with a character, Luke Skywalker, with a problem. How does he fight back against the evil empire? He meets a guide, that little person. What's his name?
Yoda.
Yoda, thank you. And he gives them a plan, which they follow, and he calls them to action. And it results in either one of two things, either success or failure. No good story can result in only one of those two, because you need to keep people in suspense, right? So if there's no failure written into this, then there's no real success. And so this is the story brand and the hero's journey. Now, how do you translate that into what I'm talking about? Here's an example, and I've used it from my own business. When I'm talking to people in an elevator pitch or on my website, and I'll show you this in a second, I start with something like, if only somebody asks me what I do, I say many entrepreneurs feel overwhelmed and stuck. I help them create a clear growth plan so they can scale their business with confidence. So let's dig into that a little bit further. So here's how that discussion would evolve. CEOs and business owners often feel overwhelmed by day-to-day demands, leaving little time to focus on what truly drives them or grows their team effectively. My Leadership Momentum program delivers clear principles and personalized coaching to help leaders regain focus, build momentum, and empower their teams to thrive. And with this program, leaders can reclaim their time, lead with confidence, and create a high-performing team that supports their vision and goals. Very simple little story. Here's what you start with as a problem. Here's how I work at it with a solution. And here's how you feel as a result. So, problem, solution, benefit. StoryBrand is that marketing framework. Now, here's how I use it on my website. Are these problems you experience? Can't get everything done? Always playing catch up? I work hard, I deserve more. Where's the solution? I can help solve these with a leadership momentum plan. So you saw the theory I just put you to. This is the practice. One-to-one leader coaching, team leadership and cohesion training, fractional CEO or integrator. So what I've done is I've changed the dialogue from being nervous, knowing that I have imposter syndrome, to leading with helping somebody with a problem that hopefully I can solve. Simon Sinek once talked at length about, people said to him, how do you feel? You get in front of 1,000, 2,000 people and do talks. How do you do that? He said, well, like everybody, I have self-doubt, and it is persistent. So he probably suffers from imposter syndrome as well. But he says the way he overcomes it is, before I step onto the stage, I think about how I'm helping the people in the audience. What are the problems that they have that my talk will help them solve? How can I make things better for them? That's what I've just adapted through StoryBrand in the same way. And I do the same when I do talks as well, such as this one, which is, was I nervous before talking to you guys? Yeah, of course I was. But did I feel I had material based on my experience and expertise that I could help you with? Absolutely. So I could step into the arena and hopefully deliver something that you found interesting. By the way, here's the plug for the book that Ron Leam and myself and Linda wrote recently, called Conversations for Clarity. And it's available on Kindle and obviously through Amazon. It is questions that normally solopreneurs and entrepreneurs do not ask themselves until possibly it's too late. So with that, I'm going to ask if you have any questions.
Do you see any evidence of imposter syndrome having a group effect? In other words, is it somewhat contagious when you're in small groups or circles?
I'm not sure it's contagious. Let me think about that for a second. No, but you recognize it in others. So I'm not sure it's a contagious thing. unless recognition tends to breed that. But I think you just recognize it in others, because if you've got it in yourself and you recognized it, you can see where there's self-doubt in others as well. And so I'm going to answer it a different way. One of the things that I've noticed is that because I'm a recovering imposter syndrome, right? Maybe I'm not. But if I recognize it with others, then I'll ask them questions more than I probably would normally and try and draw things out from them. So, yeah.
Yeah, the reason I ask is sometimes you see if somebody takes a cautious approach to maybe an initiative that's being discussed, that tends to flavor the behavior of the group or the response of the
Yeah.
group.
But so it'd probably be difficult for me to do, Linda, because I'm like in a group. So
I know.
I probably am not very good at recognize, but I do recognize it in others and try and draw them out. Yeah, and um, I think this is a problem with most leaders in groups. They they do suffer from imposter syndrome, have never recognized it, so they tend to want to monopolize the conversation, and we've all heard the loudest voice wins, which of course is not true at all. And so nobody else talks up. So these other people probably don't suffer from imposter syndrome. They suffer from the lack of empathy and the poor leadership from somebody with the loudest voice. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Peter, thank you for the presentation. I do have a question. So, public speaking is a fear that most people have. And your presentation, you kind of link this to the imposter's syndrome. So that means that everyone that has that fear of public speaking somehow has this syndrome.
Possibly, or there might just be self-doubt. If it's persistent, in spite of the fact that they've done many talks and have got the experience to deliver, like Simon Sinek, then yeah, it probably is imposter syndrome. And so, as I described with Simon Sinek, I think he's recognized that himself, and that's one of the things he uses to overcome it. Much as I went through the story brand, because since I've reframed what I do these talks for, or when I'm speaking to customers, because I'm genuinely trying to help them overcome a problem, then I don't get so much self-doubt. There's a couple of other things I still get, which is the perfectionism, which I fight, and the overworking. But again, I recognize those for what they are now. So to answer your question, I think, yeah, it's probably is imposter syndrome if you're experienced and you've been doing a lot of talk and you know what you're talking about, and you're still really concerned about whether your message is going to be accepted, then yeah, you do.
So besides thinking, okay, I'm gonna help the people that are listening to me, right? Like, so your nervous or stress goes down by thinking that whatever you're saying is gonna support the group. Is there anything else or any advice that you can give me? Because public speaking is something that I've been doing for years and I feel like nervous every time. Is there any exercises, any other thoughts that you can advise me to think of before I go on stage?
Yeah, so you're gonna get that. I think everybody does that does public speaking. It's a question of what degree it is. So I used to get it to the point where I would panic about forgetting what I was going to say, whether I'd hit the right button. It would really be that extreme. Because I now think about, you're actually really good at this. Otherwise, you wouldn't be asked to do it again and again. You have enough experience to field questions such as this one, right? So and you've experienced what you're talking about. I've minimized that nervousness down to just thinking about logically when I'm going to deliver things, the examples I'm going to use, and some of the stories. And what I focus on is this audience is really looking forward to what you've got to say because it's going to help them. Back to that Simon Sinek phrase switched a light on for me, which was that's how you need to look at when you speak to. And it's minimized all that noise that used to creep in about last minute, looking at notes at the last minute, you know? You know this shit. What are you worried about? Right? And by the way, just by looking at notes and trying to remember things, it's like revising for exams. How much do you remember when you're standing out in the corridor doing last minute revision when you actually walk in to the gymnasium and sit down to do that test? None of that 5 or 10, 15 minutes before you went in will you remember. It's the same thing with a talk. Just relax because you've done your prep already.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Breathing. That's a good one.
Breathing is.
Don't stop breathing. That's the instant way to death. All right. Are we good?
Are we good? Ron, were you going to weigh in on anything? I have a hard time thinking that you don't have a thought or two.
I was filled with self-doubt.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, it's a comment, and then there's a question at the end of it, Peter. When you were going through this kind of signals of imposter syndrome, I was reminded of that old idea from the late 60s, the Peter principle, which was that everyone in an organization rises to their level of incompetency eventually. And so my question is, could that be a cause of, or a reinforcer of imposter syndrome, that you're in an organization, you're moving up, but you keep thinking, this is the job that they find me out. This is the one where I'm incompetent. And by the way, the book that came from was originally written as a satire. So we can take that principle for what it's worth. But so anyway, your thoughts on that?
I don't know. I think that that's interesting. I think what happens is, as people, and by the way, I have moved up through an organization. I moved up through the Coca-Cola organization fairly rapidly. I didn't operate in this country. I worked overseas. I ended up being vice president for 30 countries over in Vienna, Austria. Do you know, it's probably, there was a state at which I just knew that I was going to get to the next position. But in the last two positions, I probably did start thinking, are they going to find me out? I mean, have I hit, to use my example earlier, have I hit my own glass ceiling? When will the downward spiral start, where they start to demote you or move you sideways? So yeah, I think that is and I think, you know, that was probably when I first started thinking that imposter syndrome was a thing for me. Now, don't forget, this thing came out in 1978. I was still moving up the ranks. I became vice president in 1994. So, you know, I became aware of what that was at about that time. So, yeah, I think I hadn't thought about that before. Damn it. But I think I might use that in the next talk. Yeah, that's a good point.